It was a night in October 2017, and I, Jack Thompson, a veteran truck driver with over 30 years on the road, was on my usual route through the Arizona desert. The sky was pitch black, with no moon or stars to light the way. My headlights, worn out from years of use, barely pierced the darkness ahead. The radio crackled, picking up only static, and I felt utterly alone in that vast, barren expanse. It was past midnight when I saw something unusual in the distance. A pair of flashing lights cut through the darkness, catching my attention. As I got closer, I realized they were the emergency lights of a car stopped in the middle of the road. My trucker instincts told me to keep going, but something about the scene intrigued me. Maybe someone needed help, I thought. I slowed down and parked the truck a few meters from the vehicle. It was an old black sedan with faded paint and visible scratches even in the dim light. The doors were closed, and there was no sign of movement. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck, feeling the fine desert sand crunch under my boots. I approached the car cautiously, shining my flashlight inside. The driver's seat was empty, as was the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle or blood, just an eerie silence that seemed to swallow everything around. I called out a few times but got no response. Then I noticed something strange. The trunk was slightly ajar, as if someone had closed it in a hurry. My heart raced, and a feeling of dread began to take hold of me. I knew I shouldn't get involved, but curiosity got the better of me. With trembling hands, I fully opened the trunk. What I saw inside chilled me to the bone. Several large, black garbage bags were piled up and tied with thick rope. The smell coming from them was nauseating, a mix of decay and chemicals. My mind started to imagine the worst. Could they be bodies, drugs, evidence of some heinous crime? I took a step back, feeling cold sweat trickle down my back. It was then that I heard a furious shout coming from the darkness. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The voice was deep and filled with rage. I quickly turned, pointing my flashlight in the direction of the voice. A tall, burly man emerged from the shadows, running towards me. His eyes glowed with murderous fury, and in his right hand, reflecting the light of my flashlight, was a pistol. I didn't think twice. I dropped the flashlight and sprinted towards my truck. The man was shouting obscenities, threatening to kill me if I didn't stop. I heard a gunshot, and a bullet whizzed past my head, ricocheting off the truck's metal. With my heart in my mouth, I managed to open the door and throw myself into the cab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The man was getting closer, shouting and firing. The truck's windows shattered from the impact of the bullets. Finally, the engine roared to life. I floored the accelerator, the wheels spinning in the sand before finding traction. The truck surged forward, leaving the furious man and the mysterious car behind. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man's figure grow smaller until it disappeared into the darkness. I drove for hours without stopping, fear keeping me alert. My mind kept replaying those terrible moments. Who was that man? What was in those bags? Why was he so desperate to kill me? When the sun finally rose, I stopped at a gas station. My hands were still trembling as I picked up the phone to call the police. But then, I hesitated. What if that man was part of a bigger criminal organization? What if he had taken down my truck's license plate? My family could be in danger if I talked. I spent the whole day in that dilemma, alternating between moments of courage to report and moments of sheer terror. In the end, fear won. I decided to continue my journey and try to forget what I had seen, but that night stayed etched in my memory like a scar. In the years that followed, I could never completely forget that night. Every time I took to the road, especially at night, I felt a chill down my spine. I began to avoid routes through the desert and never stopped to help anyone on the road again. The worst part was the news. Whenever I heard about bodies found in the desert or unsolved crimes in the region, my mind went back to that car, those bags in the trunk. Guilt gnawed at me. What if I could have prevented more deaths? What if my silence had cost innocent lives? One night, 5 years after the incident, I was in a roadside bar when I overheard a conversation. Two men were discussing a serial killer operating in the desert, leaving bodies in garbage bags. My blood ran cold. One of them mentioned that the killer had almost been caught in 2017 but managed to escape thanks to an idiot who got involved where he shouldn't have. At that moment, I realized the true horror of what had happened. It wasn't just about what I had seen that night, but about all the lives that could have been saved if I had had the courage to speak up. The real monster wasn't just the man with the gun, but also the silence I chose to keep. And now, years later, that silence continues to haunt me, a burden I will carry forever. My name is Mike Anderson, and this story still makes me tremble every time I tell it. It was my first week as a truck driver, and I was determined to prove myself. On that Friday night, I was driving on Interstate 95 crossing the state of Georgia. The clock on the dashboard read 2:37 a.m., and my eyes struggled to stay open. I realized I urgently needed an energy drink, or I would end up dozing off at the wheel. That's when I saw a sign announcing a rest area a few miles ahead. I felt a momentary relief, imagining that soon I'd have a cold can of Red Bull in my hands. I exited the highway and drove down a poorly lit secondary road. The darkness seemed to swallow everything around, and the truck's headlights barely penetrated the black curtain. After a few minutes, I saw a sign flashing frantically, 24H Convenience Store. The rest of the establishment was completely dark. I parked the truck and got out, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the intermittent buzzing of the sign. I approached the store's door, noticing it was slightly ajar. A strong smell of mold and something I couldn't identify filled my nostrils. I pushed the door open, which creaked eerily. The darkness inside was almost tangible. I fumbled along the wall for a switch, but found nothing. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the store's interior. What I saw left me speechless. The shelves were empty, covered in a thick layer of dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floor was littered with dry leaves and trash. It was as if no one had set foot in there for years. Even so, driven by thirst and fatigue, I decided to look for the refrigerator. I found it at the back of the store, but when I opened the door, it was completely empty and unplugged. Disappointment mixed with a growing sense of unease. Then I heard it. A subtle noise, like someone dragging their feet upstairs. My heart raced. I quickly turned, illuminating the corners of the store with my phone's flashlight. I saw no one, but I was certain I wasn't alone. Survival instinct took over. I ran towards the exit, stumbling over objects scattered on the floor. When I reached the door, I clearly heard heavy footsteps coming down a staircase. I didn't look back. I leaped out of the store and sprinted to the truck as if my life depended on it. With trembling hands, I managed to start the engine. I floored the accelerator, the wheels screeching on the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, I swore I saw a silhouette at the store's door, but I didn't stop to confirm. I drove like a madman for a few miles until I saw another convenience store, this time well lit with cars in the parking lot. I stopped, still panting, and quickly went inside. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Bob, noticed my distressed state and asked if I was all right. Between sips of an energy drink I bought, I told him about the abandoned store. Bob looked at me with a grave expression and said, "Son, that store burned down 5 years ago. 3 people died inside. They say the place is haunted." I felt my blood run cold. Bob must have noticed my panic because he quickly changed the subject, talking about the weather and local news. I stayed there for a few more minutes, trying to calm down and gather the courage to get back on the road. When I finally returned to the truck, I was still shaken, but felt a bit safer. I turned on the radio to ward off the silence and dark thoughts. I promised myself I would never stop at unknown places in the middle of the night again. After about an hour of driving, I started to feel watched. It was a strange sensation, like someone was breathing down my neck. I adjusted the mirrors several times but saw nothing but the night's darkness. Then I noticed a subtle movement behind the curtain behind my seat. My heart nearly stopped. Something or someone was moving there inside my truck's cab. Panic took over me. My mind flashed back to the abandoned store, to ghost stories. Had something followed me from there? My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, affected by the night's events. But then, I clearly heard a whisper. Unintelligible words, but definitely human. It wasn't my imagination. At that moment, I made a decision. I accelerated the truck, ignoring speed limits. I knew there was a police station a few miles ahead. It was my only chance. The minutes dragged on. Every second was torture, knowing I wasn't alone in the cab. The movements behind the curtain became more frequent, as if whatever was there knew I had noticed its presence. Finally, I saw the station's lights. I braked hard, making the truck skid. I jumped out and ran to the entrance, screaming for help. 2 officers came out quickly, guns drawn, alerted by my desperate cries. Between sobs and broken words, I explained the situation. The officers, skeptical at first, decided to investigate. They cautiously approached the truck, ordering whoever was inside to come out with their hands up. The ensuing silence was deafening. Then, slowly, the curtain moved. A hand emerged, then another. To my utter horror, not 1 but 3 people emerged from the back of the cab. 2 men and a woman, all with desperate and scared looks. The last man out held a gun, which he immediately dropped upon seeing the officers. Within seconds, the 3 were on the ground, being handcuffed. In the hours that followed, the truth came to light. The 3 were fugitives, escaping from a nearby prison. They had hidden in the abandoned store, using it as a temporary hideout. When I entered, they thought I was the police and decided to follow me, hiding in the truck while I was at the other convenience store. The armed man, identified as Derek Smith, was the group's leader. He confessed that he planned to kill me and used the truck to flee the state. The other 2, Mary Collins and Tom Baker, were accomplices in a series of violent crimes. As I listened to the detectives recount the horrendous crimes committed by that trio, I felt my world crumble. For hours I had driven with killers inches away from me, completely vulnerable. The detective leading the case, a man named John Harris, said something I'll never forget. "Mike, you have no idea how close you came to death tonight." These 3 are responsible for dozens of deaths. What happened here was a miracle. In the days and weeks that followed, I was haunted by nightmares. I couldn't sleep without reliving those moments of terror, imagining what could have happened if I hadn't noticed the movements behind the curtain. I quit truck driving soon after. The road, which once represented freedom, now only brought back memories of fear. To this day, years later, I can't pass by an abandoned convenience store or drive at night without feeling chills. The experience taught me that sometimes the real monsters aren't ghosts or supernatural creatures. They are real people, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And the line between being alive and dead can be as thin as a truck's curtain. My name is Mike, and I've been a truck driver for over 25 years. I thought I'd seen it all on these roads, but what happened that night changed my life forever. It was an ordinary Friday. I was on my usual route, transporting goods from Chicago to a small town in Missouri. The sun had long since set, and I was alone on the road, with only the hum of the engine and the occasional croak of a frog for company. It was past midnight when I turned onto a rural road. The headlights of my truck were the only light for miles. The radio began to crackle, so I turned it off. The silence was almost deafening. Then I saw something strange in the middle of the road, a small, purple spot. I slowed down, thinking it might be an animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a dress. A child's purple dress, lying on the asphalt as if it had fallen from a moving car. I stopped the truck and got out to investigate. The dress was intact, with no signs of wear or dirt. It looked brand new. I looked around, searching for any sign of an accident or people nearby, but there was nothing except the darkness of the forest lining the road. I decided to take the dress with me. Maybe I could turn it in to the police in the next town. Little did I know that decision would be the start of my nightmare. I got back into the truck and resumed my journey. I hadn't gone even a kilometer when I spotted another object on the road. This time, it was shoes. Black patent leather shoes, like the ones girls wear on special occasions. My heart began to race. Something was definitely not right. I stopped again and got out of the truck. The shoes were perfectly aligned in the middle of the road, as if someone had placed them there on purpose. I picked up the shoes and placed them with the dress. A feeling of dread began to settle in my stomach. I nervously looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me from the shadows. I got back into the truck, but now I was on high alert. My eyes scanned the road and the surrounding trees for any suspicious movement. Then I saw another piece of clothing, and another, and another. A macabre trail of children's clothes stretched along the road. Socks, shorts, t-shirts, all perfectly preserved and arranged like breadcrumbs in a twisted fairy tale. My mind screamed at me to turn around and get out of there as fast as possible. But something compelled me to continue. Maybe it was the concern that some child might be in danger. Or maybe it was just the morbid curiosity that sometimes drives us to do stupid things. I kept driving slowly, picking up the clothes one by one. My passenger seat was already covered in a pile of them when I heard something that chilled my blood. A scream. A high-pitched, desperate scream of a child, coming from the forest to my right. I slammed on the brakes so hard the truck's wheels skidded on the asphalt. The scream came again, louder and more urgent. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my flashlight and jumped out of the truck. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" Silence. Only the sound of the wind in the trees and my own heavy breathing. I pointed the flashlight at the forest, its beam barely penetrating the dense darkness. Then I had an idea. I ran back to the truck and turned on the high beams, directing them at the forest. What I saw made me wish I had never stopped on that cursed road. At the edge of the forest, illuminated by the headlights, stood several figures. Men, women, and children. All standing, staring directly at me. Their faces were pale, almost translucent, and their eyes, God, their eyes were completely black. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. The figures began to move towards me slowly, as if floating above the ground. The children extended their arms, as if they wanted me to pick them up. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. The clothes I had collected were exactly the same as the ones the ghostly children were wearing. My brain finally kicked into gear, and I ran back to the truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The figures were getting closer, their empty faces fixed on me. I managed to start the engine just as the first child touched the side of the truck. The metal hissed and smoked where their ghostly fingers touched it. I floored the accelerator, the wheels spinning before finding traction. I drove like a madman, well over the speed limit, praying to find an escape from that nightmare. The figures chased me for a while, running at an impossible speed, before finally disappearing into the darkness. I drove for hours, not daring to stop, until I reached the next town. I went straight to the police station, babbling my story to the officer on duty. He obviously didn't believe me, especially when I opened the truck door and found all the clothes I had collected were gone. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But every time I close my eyes, I see those pale faces and black eyes staring back at me. I stopped driving at night. Then I stopped driving altogether. Now, I rarely leave my house. People say I've gone mad, that I need help. Maybe they're right, but I know what I saw that night, and I know they're still out there, waiting in the darkness, waiting for some other fool to stop and pick up a purple dress on the road. If you're driving late at night and see something strange on the road, please don't stop. No matter what you see or hear, just keep driving. Because if you stop, they'll come for you, and once they get you, you never come back. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I can still hear those children's screams. And I wonder if somehow I could have saved them, or if, from the beginning, I was doomed to become another victim of that cursed road. Now I live in constant fear. Every shadow, every noise makes me jump. I sleep with the lights on, if I can sleep at all. And when I do, I dream of that road, of the purple dress, of those black eyes staring at me in the darkness. I've tried to seek help, to tell my story to others, but no one believes me. They say I need treatment, that I'm delusional. But I know the truth. I saw what I saw. And the worst part? Sometimes when I look in the mirror for a split second, I see those same black eyes staring back at me, and I wonder if, somehow, part of that darkness now lives inside me. So, if you ever hear about an old trucker named Mike who went crazy after a night drive, know that there's more to the story than people think. And if you ever find yourself on a dark, lonely road and see a purple dress on the asphalt, don't stop. For the love of God, don't stop. Because they're waiting, and they never, ever let anyone go.